on. Now it's on. Oh, remind me, I gotta change your groups after this quiz. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And then I'm gonna make you run around the building, too, to wake up. Yep. Who's missing? Who all is missing today? Oh, she's open. All right, so pass those on up. Don't change it. All right, so which of these increases red blood cell production? It is EPO. Exactly. What does TPO increase the production of? What are thrombocytes?
For clotting.
Yeah, they're platelets. They're for clotting. Exactly. What's the name of the molecule that transports oxygen? Hemoglobin. We saw that in the respiratory system. What about this one? Which plasma protein is important for blood clotting? It's the fibrinogen. And then albumins for like osmotic pressure and transport. Globulins are antibodies. It's the other main protein in there. Not a component of blood plasma. Protein water soluble white blood cells. It's white blood cells. Plasma means no cells, basically. Which of these is not a function of blood? Transport nutrients, protection from infection, regulate homeostasis. Almost homeostasis. All the above. All the above there for that one. All right. Do you feel like the quizzes are getting easier? Not the same. That's good. Yeah. I think as people get more used to them, they get, even though they're not technically easier, it seems easier. Like the 201 quizzes, they're pretty easy, and your quizzes are harder, and your average is higher, just because like you're more used to everything. It's kind of interesting. Oh, like whether you have 5 days, 3 days, 1 day to prepare.
Yeah, and summer, fall, and
I know. It is tough to take this in the summer. It's tiring for whoever's teaching it too. 'Cause you're like way less time to grade things, way less time to get everything ready. There's that one. All right. So the blood. That's what we're doing today. Mostly to get us ready for, I think, our most fun lab that we do, which is next week. We get to take your blood, see how long it takes it to clot, stain it. There's like one other thing we do with it. Oh, your cholesterol levels. So remind me to tell you on Wednesday, like write down whatever you eat on Wednesday, if you can remember. Just for fun. We'll do a food log on Wednesday before lab. All right, who's heard of EPO doping?
Isn't it like athletes do? Like
Uh-huh.
because they give themselves more red blood cells or something?
It's close. It's not they give themselves red blood
Like,
cells.
Take it out and then place them back in or something?
That's one thing they do, where they just directly like put more red blood cells in. I've heard of that, just because they have more oxygen. You could also just inject yourself with EPO. What does EPO do? More red blood cells. So if you're an endurance athlete and you're pumping yourself with EPO, what do you have more of? And then what can you do more of? So you just, more red blood cells means it takes you longer to get hypoxic in your muscles. So you're able to bike farther, run farther, anything like that. And another interesting thing, have you heard of like Olympic athletes training at higher altitudes? Why do you think they do that?
To increase the amount of hemoglobin,
How does that happen?
because there's less oxygen in the air, your body makes more to compensate.
What
Is
is,
that why the Colts sucked last Sunday? Because they had this stupid oxygen mask.
well, supposedly that's a reason the Broncos have an advantage, because everybody else comes from like sea level. And, you know, since everybody lives there in Denver, their players have more red blood cells. Because they don't come till usually they fly in like Thursday or something for games, I think. That's not enough time for this. So when you go to high altitude, you make more EPO, which makes more red blood cells. But I'm trying, what town is it in the mountains that they trade in?
Leadville.
Is it Leadville? Yeah. So that's at over 9,000, I think, 9,500. Which is funny. So it's legal to go to high altitude and train and make EPO, but it's not allowed to inject yourself with it, even though it's the same end result. So, interesting. And of course, the challenge with this, how do you know if someone's putting EPO in if it's something your body already makes? It's not like it's some different thing you're injecting. So I think what they do is they kind of take like a baseline reading on everybody. And then they kind of know, well, it shouldn't go up more than 10% or 5%. Otherwise, it indicates that you're adding it yourself by injecting it. All right, so anyways, here's your blood. You read all about this at home already. I like this one because it shows you kind of the percentages by volume. So your blood is 55% plasma by volume, only 45% cells, and they just call it formed elements, mostly because platelets are tiny, they don't have nucleuses. They're only kind of a cell. And red blood cells, they don't have nucleuses either. So I think that's why they don't call them cells. It's mostly red blood cells, the smaller percentage of white blood cells and platelets. The white blood cells we'll talk all about, I think, next time, right? Yeah. So we're just talking about red blood cells today, white blood cells next time. Plasma is mostly water. There's those proteins we talked about. And then there's, of course, dissolved things in there, like wastes and nutrients. And your electrolytes, like sodium. And if we successfully stain our blood, next week you'll see something like this, where it's mostly red blood cells. You'll see a few tiny little platelets in there, and then the different white blood cells. You could tell which ones are which by their shape, their staining. We'll get into all that. This is a cool one. This is if you zoom in an electron microscope up to 3500 magnification, which is way more than you can do with a light microscope. And it's interesting how the red blood cell's so like soft and smooth. And then these other, like the white blood cells, got little parts of it kind of sticking out to feel on stuff. And then the platelet looks totally different too. It's got all kinds of projections coming out of it. All right, so your blood cells aren't very long lasting in general. They're not really made to be durable. They're easily replaced. So you need to make new blood cells all the time. So your white blood cells, which are lymphocytes, depending on the type, it's like weeks to years. Your red blood cells, they only live for 120 days at the most. And platelets only survive for 8 days. And of course, the difference between those white blood cells and red and platelets is the red blood cells and platelets, they don't have a nucleus. So that means they can't make any proteins or replace anything that's damaged. So they're kind of made to be disposable. Once the hemoglobin and the enzymes in it stop working and run out, or the membranes start breaking down, the body just gets rid of it and makes new ones. And of course, that's hematopoiesis, making new blood cells. So where do you do it? In the fetus, it's basically kind of all over. So like the liver makes new blood cells, the spleen, the lymph nodes. But after you're over 3 months old, it shifts just to the red bone marrow. And as you become an adult, it's only certain places in the red bone marrow. And that's mostly because as you get bigger, do you think, are your bones larger and longer and everything? So you don't need as many different places. You've got plenty of area, or I guess volume, in those certain bones to make enough cells for you. But the fetal skeleton, there's not much bone marrow at all, so you got to use other places to make them. So here's the adult, and you can see in red, those are the places that you make your new red blood cells and white blood cells. So you can imagine if you're doing some kind of bone marrow transplant the old way, where you had to like stick a needle in the bone, where would they usually do that, do you think? Right? That's because the hip area is red. You do have active bone marrow there. And those bones are pretty thick too, so there's lots of bone marrow in there. So right in there. All right, so here's a crazy diagram for you. So all of your blood cells start out as stem cells. And because they can turn into so many different types, they're called pluripotent stem cells, which means they can turn into lots of different things. So this one kind of stem cell can turn into all of your blood cells, red blood cells, platelets, white blood cells. And depending on the signals they're getting, that stem cell divides. And And the one thing this diagram's kind of missing is this idea. So you've got a stem cell, it divides, and in order to keep your population of stem cells without losing any, one of the daughter cells stays as a stem cell. So it could be used later. And then this one basically is going to divide and divide through these different stages till eventually you get to the final cell, like the red blood cell. And so even though you start with just one, if it divides like 10 or 20 times, now you've got hundreds and hundreds from this one cell that you started with. But you conserved the stem cell part of it. So for a red blood cell, the first division, it becomes a myeloid stem cell. And then if it's going this way, it's a CFUE, which is colony-forming unit erythrocyte. Just a name for the developing cell. And then a proerythroblast. And then the proerythroblast loses its nucleus to become a reticulocyte. And then finally, it gets its final shape, that biconcave, almost jelly donut kind of thing, to become a red blood cell. So those are kind of...
doing so much like stem cell research for like paralysis and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like what do they make it into to treat?
So for paralysis, one of the real hopes, because those pluripotent stem cells, as they start out, they can't turn into like nerve cells or whatever. But they've had a lot of success like reprogramming these cells to become more like embryonic stem cells. So they, at least what they want to do is, it's really easy to collect some stem cells from your bone marrow, modify them a little bit, turn into embryonic stem cells, which can turn into any tissue. And then they hope they could use those to grow new neurons.
And aren't they, it's kind of a bigger thing now, it's like collecting it from
The cord blood? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so has anyone looked into the price of that lately?
the what?
The price of it?
No.
Did my sister do it? I think it was like $3,000 or $4,000 or something. I can't remember if my sister decided to do it or not. But yeah, one of the few places you can get actual, like, at least they seem to be like embryonic stem cells, is from the umbilical cord itself. And so the idea is you take those out, and they're, a perfect match for the child because they're their cells. Freeze them, and then if they have some weird condition, maybe there's a treatment that can use those. Like if they develop leukemia or something, then you could just take those stored cells and then put them back in the kid. Which is kind of interesting. There's very few treatments that actually use them yet, so it's more like you're hoping that maybe if something happens to your kid, those would help somehow. But of course, it's just as likely, maybe you could just use those pluripotent stem cells and change them back to embryonic ones. Maybe that's what it'll end up being. So, all right, and we'll talk about all this other stuff next time, but there's all different pathways to make the different white blood cells and the platelets too. All right, so based on that, what's the correct order of making a red blood cell? Okay. Oh, I didn't give you your new groups. Oh, I don't think so. I'll change you before the assignment. Everybody likes their group. Always. You'll like your next group too. We'll see. I know. I mean, look at those. Look how mean everybody in those other groups looks. Where's your mean face? Mm-hmm. All right, so 70% C. That's right, pluripotent, myeloid, protioblast, reticulocyte, erythrocyte. That's the order. All right, what do red blood cells look like? They're mostly just hemoglobin inside. Hemoglobin carries pretty much all the oxygen through the blood and 20% of the carbon dioxide. And it consists of 4 proteins. That's the globulin part. And each of those proteins has 1 iron ion in the middle. And each of those iron ions binds 1 oxygen, or 1 O2 molecule. So that means how many oxygen atoms does 1 hemoglobin carry? How many oxygen atoms? What? Well, I'm saying one hemoglobin has 4 hemes, which means it has 4 irons, so it'd be 8, right? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry?
I thought there's only 1 hemoglobin on each red blood cell?
Each red blood cell has lots of hemoglobins.
Oh, I thought you asked how many hemoglobins of red blood cell.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. A lot, definitely. But if you're looking at 1 hemoglobin, it has 4 irons, 4 times 2 gives you 8 oxygen atoms. And you can see that fancy picture here. Here's hemoglobin. Each of those, I don't know what to call those, little orange rings holds 2 oxygen atoms. 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. Right, and that's of course that's the main thing you need iron for. So what happens if you don't, so like for people who are like vegans, they occasionally have problems not getting enough iron. So what do you think happens to them? They what? They bruise easily. That's because they have anemia if they're not getting any iron. Not to say you can't get iron from other sources, but the major one, we usually get it from just like meat or things like that. Do you know you can actually get iron from cooking in iron skillets and stuff? Or iron Dutch ovens? You can actually get a lot of iron that way. It's kind of interesting.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. All right, what do they look like? That shape that we talked about, the biconcave. It's like if you took a jelly donut and like squished it like this. Without poking through it, just kind of squished it a little bit on both sides. That's the shape it has. And the reason it has that is that gives you a higher, more surface area to volume than you would as just like a round cell. And that's good because their whole function is to let gases diffuse in and out. So the more surface area you have, the faster you can move the gases in and out of the cell. Also, since they're discs and not like round, sorry, what's the 3-dimensional round shape? Sphere, sorry. So they're not spheres, they're more like little discs. And that lets them stack up and move through blood vessels faster, like the capillaries. I've got a picture of that in the next one. I can't remember how to say that word. Oh yeah, the rolu, the French word. So you can see them all stacked up here. And also because they're discs, they can like bend a little bit and flex as they go through really narrow places. So when you look in the capillary, it's basically packed full of those stacks of red blood cells, like dinner plates stacked on top of one another, just kind of flowing through there. Kind of crazy. All right, so most of what we're talking about today is the life cycle of red blood cells and how the number of red blood cells is controlled. So that's the hard stuff. All right, so 120 days, and the main two places that do this are the spleen and the liver. So there's macrophages in those locations, and they can tell when those red blood cells are starting to kind of break down. Like the membranes are getting weaker, they just don't look quite right. So obviously you don't want those blood cells just to be breaking down and bursting all over the body. That would probably cause like inflammation and blood clots. So instead, it's all regulated. And then break down the components, get rid of some of it as waste, recycle the parts you can recycle and reuse. And this is pretty crazy. So 1% of the red blood cells wear out every day, and that equates to 3 million blood cells per second. Which means, how many is that in a minute? 180 million in a minute. So in the hour you're in here, you can't do that math. 60 times 180 million. Is that like 6 billion? 10 billion? Right? Am I getting that kind of right? So it's some insane number of red blood cells you're recycling every hour. And how does that work? Macrophages eat them. They break them down. And then they break down hemoglobin into its parts, which is a protein part, a heme part, and then the iron part. The proteins turn into amino acids to be reused, because proteins are made of amino acids, so you just break down into pieces. The heme is broken down into biliverdin, which we'll see what happens to biliverdin after it's broken down, and then the iron gets broken off from the heme. So there's the 3 parts we have to get rid of, use up. All right, so that heme is biliverdin, which is green. It's turned into bilirubin in the liver. And then bilirubin is a large component of bile. So if you remember seeing the, when we did the dissection, what color was the gallbladder? Like greenish black. That's from the bilirubin that's in the bile, which, gallbladder stores bile. It's just like a sack of bile, basically. And you've heard of jaundice before, I'm sure. That's when you get bilirubin build up in the blood, which means something's, the liver's not processing it correctly or not excreting it correctly. Common for babies, just because their organs aren't quite working perfectly yet. I went to the hospital because they thought I had jaundice, but really I was eating too many carrots. I'm not even joking. They're like, no, he's fine. What has he been eating? My mom's like, he eats only carrots. It's the only thing he'll eat. Like baby food carrots, All right, so anyways, where does your bile go? From the gallbladder, it goes to,
Stomach.
not to the stomach. It comes from the liver to the gallbladder to
The bile ducts.
the small intestine, to the duodenum, right? That's where you put the bile, into the duodenum. So that means it's in mixed in with the chyme, basically. And then in the large intestine, that bilirubin's turned into urobilin and stercobilin, which is kind of interesting. And this urobilin here gets actually absorbed into the body, and it goes to the kidneys, and it goes into the urine. What color do you think it is? It is yellow. It's kind of crazy. So pee is yellow from red blood cell breakdown, basically. And I think, and we're actually going to test, when we do the urine analysis thing, we're going to test your urine to see if you've got, what your levels are of urobilin, and check to make sure you don't have any bilirubin or other things in there. But, that's actually that's one of my other favorite labs. That we get to all pee on a stick and examine our results of how we're doing. Yeah, that's true. And sometimes when I'm bored, I just come in here and get a urine analysis stick and see how I'm doing. Like, I had like 3 cups of coffee this morning. Let's see what that did to my body. If you want to join the fun, you can get a 100-pack for like $15 on Amazon. And don't worry, it doesn't have pregnancy test on it. We're not going to find out anybody's pregnant or anything. Yeah. Yeah, whether they're happy or not, they'll probably still be crying. All right, so iron. Iron's reused. Your body doesn't want to just waste the iron because it's not the easiest thing to get, at least like in an evolutionary sense. You know, think about cavemen or whatever. Like, it probably wasn't that easy for them to like catch a mammoth and eat it. So they had to go long periods of time without any like iron source. So iron leaves like the liver, the spleen, in a transport protein called transferrin, and it's stored mostly in the bones or some in the liver. Which makes sense, because where do you make your red blood cells? The bone marrow, right? So they kind of send the iron to the bone marrow to get made into new red blood cells. All right. I put these slides in here for you to kind of review, but I'm going to give you the whole picture. I think it kind of makes sense. All right, so this is what we're going to look at. We've got a copy of it for you, and this shows you the whole process all together. You probably saw this in the book, and then you studied it carefully, or you just turned the page because it looked too crazy. Probably the second option. So I've got a whole assignment for you to work on understanding it. I don't think it needs much explanation. You just have to kind of look at it and think about it. Kind of see all the different parts and where they're going. So on your own first, I've got 4 statements on here. So it's like, what portion of the hemoglobin recycling pathway is malfunctioning for each of these conditions? And so read the condition, look at the diagram, find out what's going wrong, you think, based on that diagram. So we'll give you some time to just try it on your own first.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
Just a quick question.
Uh-huh.
So when you said like the components the hemoglobin breaks down into, or like the proteins and, and the iron and all that,
And heme. Mm-hmm.
is that what the I would be? No, J discussed the fate components. Of the
J is this whole thing.
J is going to be that.
The whole
Okay.
diagram.
Just double checking that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like what? Ooh.
Hitting the floor.
I know, right? All right, so let me put your new groups then, and then you could work with them on these. So make 4 groups. I assume the people who are missing will be back. I know at least 2 people told me why they weren't going to be here, I think. So we'll start over here with Madison as number 1. Oh, we'll count up to 4, I guess.
3.
And Alex is 3.
I'm 3.
Yeah.
3 or 4.
You're 1. And then, all right, so 1, 2, 3, and then 4 in the middle and the back.
This is 3.
You don't have to move. Again, you didn't have.
I think that's how it was last year. Like I never moved. Or I moved and then I got moved back to the same
Yeah. It's weird because it'd be more random, I think, if no one ever missed for assigning groups. But like once you take one person out, then it like totally throws everything off. It seems like.
Four. I was like a little child too. I think it almost works sometimes.
All right, so you can work with your new group there on those. And you need to tell me what is wrong. So I saw a lot of people writing liver. What do you mean? What's wrong with the liver? Or if you wrote macrophage, what's wrong with it? What's not working exactly? What is it not doing?
Which one?
I can scooch this out. I can put this away. Give you a little more space here. Oops. Sorry.
Well, that would be in
Yeah.
Let's see the levels.
Urobilin absorbed back into the blood. Urobilinogen? Yeah, back
Into the blood?
into blood.
Let's see what you mean.
So like thin and thick air. Would you say how much is put in?
Where's their thin arrows?
Like the iron, the blood area.
I don't know why there's a black line there. Instead of a, no, I don't think there's any significance of thin and thick line. Because all the iron goes to the liver first.
Yeah, so iron in the liver, but then not enough was taken out.
Are you talking about for the low levels?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We just didn't know if it was like not enough was given from the blood because of the necro. But clearly enough was given, it just wasn't taken out of the liver.
I mean, there's certainly more than one possible answer for that one.
Not enough iron was
So look over those answers you're writing and imagine if someone had that condition and they said, "What's wrong with me?" What you wrote, would that make sense? Like, is there enough words there to make it make sense? If someone asked you what's wrong with them. Oh, and make sure you're not using pronouns. If you write it in your answer, I wouldn't know what you meant. Talking about red blood cells, talking about bilirubin. What's it? All right. So we've got 4 of them. So let's make each group give us one answer. May as well. Why don't y'all tell me the first one, what you got? So the liver's not filtering the bilirubin? So you mean like it's like produced in the spleen, goes in the blood, and the liver doesn't catch it, basically? Basically. It's one possibility. That would certainly lead to that, and that'd be jaundice then, right? The liver's not taking the bilirubin out of the blood. That's a good one. What about group number 2 here? What about B? That's the hardest one. What'd you say for that one?
So the large intestine isn't absorbing enough bilirubin, your whatever,
Your ability, yes.
Large intestine isn't absorbing it? Oh, right, into the blood.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So it's being increased.
That would make sense. Did anyone have another answer? Something about bacteria for that one? I don't think the kidney would be involved. For that one, for the kidney to be involved, it would have had to say like high amounts of urobilinogen in the blood, right? But the problem is it doesn't get to the blood, it stays in the intestine. Do it? Oh, we're still on B. Yeah. We'll get to C though. You could have also said that bacteria aren't breaking down the urobilinogen like they should.
So like the bacteria found in the large intestine.
That'd be the other possible answer. Because it's supposed to be stercobilin, which is brown. So that's where the brownness comes from. Where do you think green feces comes from?
Food that's not digested and
Do I?
Having too much iron in your blood?
Not. I think that'd be for like blood in it, maybe. But green, what's green in this diagram? The bilirubin, right? Or at least yellowish. So that's where it comes from, I think. I'm not a feces expert. That's what I would imagine. Maybe next semester we'll do a fecal analysis lab.
I'll do a chemical on ourselves.
There you go. All right. See y'all are next. What about low levels of iron in the blood?
The liver isn't producing ferritin, so it can be transferred to the bone.
Yeah, so not enough ferritin produced by the liver. That makes sense. And ferritin, basically the way it works, didn't really talk about it too much, but ferritin stays, it like holds extra iron in the liver, and then it transfers the iron to transferrin to go out to the blood, to the red bone marrow. So yeah, that would make sense. Not enough ferritin in the liver for some reason. And last group.
So we said the low levels of bilirubin in the blood would affect everything from the liver, small intestine to the large intestine because it wanted there would be less bilirubin into the bile, which helps absorb some of the bacteria.
Yeah, those would all be like effects of it. But I think what we were more asking is what caused that problem in the first place?
The breakdown of bilirubin to bilirubin in the red blood cell.
Not in the red blood cell. What breaks down the red blood cells? The macrophages. So yeah, something's malfunction with the macrophages themselves. Or maybe the spleen isn't working properly. All right, what about this one? It's nice work in these groups. What about this one? Which of these does not describe a component of that recycling pathway? All right, so maybe chat with your group there. A lot of different answers out there. Oh, that is E on the bottom. Sorry. The rest of it was covered up. I'm like, how did people vote for F? All right, so we got 100% E, which is correct. Bilirubin is not excreted in the urine. Bilirubin goes to the liver, goes into the intestine. It's I always forget how to say all these, urobilin that's in the urine. Which comes from urobilinogen that was absorbed from the intestine. There's a lot of words in there. That's for sure. All right, so y'all did all that. Any questions so far? Just know that diagram, think about where everything's going. All right. So it's important to have the right amount of red blood cells in your body. So what do you think would happen to a person if they didn't have enough? What would some symptoms be if you had too few?
Tired.
Probably be tired. What would you have a hard time doing?
Anything.
What else? Besides anything specific.
The lack of what?
If you had not enough red blood cells in your body.
Carrying oxygen to yourself.
So do you think you'd be able to like walk easily a long distance? Certainly couldn't exercise without getting short of breath really quickly. And in extreme cases, yeah, you'd have maybe you'd have some brain issues. You'd be like passed out because you wouldn't have enough oxygen to your brain cells. What if you have too much? Is there a possible problem with that? Too many red blood cells?
Yeah.
What would that be?
That's not good.
You're right, it's not good. Any ideas?
I don't know what it's called. I know, like, during clinicals for, like, phlebotomy, I watched people take out their blood because they made too much.
Mm-hmm. That is like a real disorder where people make too much EPO. So the blood actually becomes too viscous, too thick. And so it's like the heart can't pump it as well anymore. And it might lead to like clotting problems. Because you remember the blood's supposed to be 55% water. If you make way too many red blood cells, maybe it's only like 40% now. So now it's like, instead of pumping water through a tube, you're pumping like syrup or something, which is a lot harder to do. So yeah, there's a certain syndrome where you make too many red blood cells. And you have to go every few weeks, I think. Do you remember the frequency that they were doing that?
I think it was, like, either every few weeks or, like,
Once a month.
something like that.
So you just go get a pint of blood taken out once a
It
month.
just depends on how much they're producing.
Right. Which is pretty crazy, I think. Like, you're required to give blood, otherwise your body's going to have a hard time.
Can they use it? Like,
They can't use it? Because there's the EPO in it, you think?
I
Or
don't know.
Wonder why they
exactly.
can't.
I can't remember what they said, but yeah, they can't use the blood.
You should ask them.
It's trashed.
You should ask them and tell us.
the trash can.
I'm curious, because it seems like you could use it, but I guess not. Wonder why. All right, so anyways, obviously those reasons, the body has to have a mechanism for making sure you have the right amount. And the easiest way to do that, because you can imagine, how would the body measure how many red blood cells you have?
There's a counter in the heart.
There's a little counter, a little gate. No, that's not how it works. Way easier is you measure how much oxygen is getting delivered, which would indicate how many red blood cells you have, because that's what they're for. So the main place you have that receptor is in your kidneys, because your kidney gets like 20% of the blood of your body. So if there's low oxygen in the kidneys, it detects that and it creates that EPO hormone, goes into the blood, and the control center's in the red bone marrow. It tells the red bone marrow to produce more red blood cells. If you have more red blood cells, you get more oxygen to the tissues. Which, more oxygen to the tissues, what does that do to the stimulus? Does it go away or get greater? It's going to go away if you make enough red blood cells. So if you notice, there's no there's no loop for high oxygen, which is how it can get kind of out of whack, because there's only the low oxygen loop. There's no sort of, hey, you have too much, you need to stop it, which is why that disorder happens. It's not like it's fixed automatically. All right. I don't know why I didn't say it in there. Let's do questions 2, 3, and 4 with your group there. Or maybe do it on your own first. Maybe a few minutes by yourself. You've got the diagram on the side. It's the same as that one. You probably answered 2 in the lab yesterday, I think. All right. So I give some time with your group there, and make sure you're talking about what happens, like at the, the cellular level, kind of, and then what that would do to the person, in what situation. Your answer.
Yeah, and so that person. No. It'd be like that. I mean, until that point, it's something like they said, from a lower altitude to here, like they would have to have like, yeah, possibly, yeah, but it doesn't say that. Yeah. Like it doesn't say if the person breathing or, yeah, but then something like, yeah. Basically, just the building around EPA production or any drug more increased to itself. So that, yeah, I mean, it'll never give the recovery. It'll never acquire increased oxygen that they need. So they'll need oxygen.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's okay.
I'm only guessing because it's like I just have had it in Grey's Anatomy.
What'd y'all say for 3?
The patient would create EPO, so the control center would get more red blood cells, so become hypoxic.
Always?
Well,
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, but kidney cells don't work.
Yeah, that's true. Because so, like, you'd eventually be recycling red blood cells, and then you get low oxygen, and you wouldn't fix it. That's true. My first thought was it would only be in, like, exercise or high altitude, but I guess it would happen anyways, wouldn't it?
eventually catch
Yeah.
up to you.
Yeah. Because this is the main, like, there's not a lot of other backup systems going on.
Smokers, they'd be in trouble.
Yeah. It's true. What'd y'all say for the third one? 3.
Down to low levels, so they wouldn't make any more red blood cells, so they would have a lower level of blood cells, and that it would cause a person to run out of breath.
Definitely. Definitely. And I saw in your second one you didn't write EPO anywhere.
Oh, look, I scribbled it out into RBC. I did have EPO.
Yeah. So EPO leading to more RBC.
Okay. That's yeah. I was kind of confused with like what the EPO is, but I knew what it did. Like
Yeah. It's a hormone
Okay, it's a hormone.
made in the kidneys. I guess I didn't tell you that. It goes through the blood to the bone marrow.
Okay, so low oxygen levels would trigger the EPO production, which makes the red blood cells, which is made into the hematocrit.
Right.
Person would have excess blood cells and wouldn't be able to, or and would run out of
Wouldn't.
run out of O2 as quickly.
And the last one, somebody else tell me. Madison's been working too hard today.
Come on. Hey, well, we've all done it together.
I know. I'm just teasing you.
Well, I just wrote down, like what you had said, that if they need too much, like, blood cells,
Uh-huh.
then they would have to go to the hospital to get the pints of blood out or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I found the name of it. Polycythemia.
Polycythemia. That's right. It's in the patho book. Polycythemia. Is it from making too much EPO? I wonder what the causes are. Look it up.
It's hereditary though.
Mm-hmm. No, it would be. It would be. Just crazy because you wonder how that gene stayed around. Like you'd think that eventually like kill you if you didn't do something about it.
Sometimes it can go into like white blood cells.
They don't know what causes it? Huh.
after this class? I'm like,
We're jogging for the other ends.
wait, maybe that was just 2 when we talked about it. I don't know.
So what would happen on 3? What would happen to the person?
I said that would be out of breath all the time.
Yeah, like your worst test you'll replace with your final. Essentially, your final grade. And now when that's done. Yeah.
Did I tell you I'm doing that for here?
We were talking about that yesterday. We're like, I don't know. I was like, I don't know if it does the first one or not. I don't know.
Yeah, probably. Why not?
Yeah. Just thinking. I think my first test was bad. My first was yeah.
Definitely for 201 because people are so. But yeah, we'll do it here too.
What did we discuss?
That's nice.
How did too much red blood cells in the system? It would get, blood would get really thick.
Yeah.
Some clotting.
Yeah, both those things. That's what I'd write for the last one. You might, I think, potentially. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And then you're like,
All right. So it's kind of interesting talking about high altitude. Heard of altitude sickness, right? What do you think that's from? That contributes, that's true. So the first, it's funny because there's like an acute and there's a chronic. So acute is, not enough oxygen to the tissues and what you're like tired, can't breathe. What about chronic? It's not too much oxygen quite, it's too much of something else.
iron.
Not hemoglobin, not iron. You're close. Not quite. That's really close though. What? I heard you say it. Yeah. So from having too much EPO makes too many red blood cells. And you get that problem of like number 4 that you just answered. Too many red blood cells, the blood can't pump as well. So that's like if you go stay at very high altitude, and just certain people, even like 11,000 feet for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, you can develop that problem. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, so acute's, it's like acute's not enough red blood cells, and then you can develop chronic, which is too many. Crazy. And it doesn't happen to everybody. I mean, really, you'd have to get, I don't think you have to go lower down.
So you have to just move, right?
I think so. I mean, I guess maybe you could go get blood taken out every month, but.
So we were gonna say, is there any way to help when because you said there's no other, what happens when you have to just work some? Do they, when you were talking about how they
Just take them out.
I couldn't go down as low. Like yours were top, so I had to hover above everybody.
All right, so last up is a little bit about sickle cell anemia while we're talking about blood cells. And you've all heard of sickle cell anemia at some point. So in sickle cell anemia, you've got a mutation that makes the hemoglobin be messed up, wrong shape, and that leads to the blood cells being the wrong shape. They're like sickle shaped instead of that nice biconcave. They look like little crescents, like that. And so when that happens, you get, some normal blood cells, but then some of these sickled cells in there. And do you think, how would those cells do going through those capillaries? Would they get all nice and stacked up, or would they kind of get caught and stuck in there? That's one problem. The other problem is, do you think, are they going to live as long, those cells, or are they going to get beat up more? So what do you think happens to that recycling pathway that we were looking at? More active or less active? More active. So because these cells are getting worn out faster, they have to get recycled faster. So that whole system has to do a lot more work, which that's actually what the enlargement of the spleen is from, because the spleen is one of the main places where you're recycling them. So it gets overworked, gets really enlarged, and it's like a crisis. It's very acute, it's painful, and if you don't treat it within like a few hours, you could die from it, which is pretty crazy. Yeah, I think that is why. I was just thinking about it. Yeah, I mean, if your spleen ruptures, blood goes all over the abdominal cavity, that's not good. So they have to get in there and treat it, probably with like anti-inflammatory shots or something. Also, about vaso-occlusive crisis, that's about cutting off blood flow to organs from those sickle cells getting in there.
So wouldn't they really try to just like make the swelling go down on the spleen, or would they just go in and take it out?
It probably depends on how bad it is, but especially for sickle cell, you probably kind of need your spleen to help with that extra recycling. So otherwise, you're going to put all that on your liver. You have to do all of it. But yeah, I don't know a whole lot about exactly how that's decided or treated. Also, the reason it's called anemia is because you have less blood cells. Because your body's trying to make more, but then they break faster, so that you're kind of always have a deficit. You don't have enough red blood cells that are working, because they only live for 10 days instead of 120. And not all of them that are produced are sickled, only some of them. Some of them are normal. So you get some normal, some sickle cell. And there's all kinds of treatments for it that kind of treat the symptoms, but it's still kind of a permanent thing, unless the newest treatment is you can get a bone marrow transplant, and that cures you. And the way that works, where do your red blood cells come from? The bone marrow. Specifically, what are they made from? What kind of cells do you make? Stem cells. So what you do is you do like radiation to kill all the stem cells, all the bad ones, and then you replace them with good stem cells from a donor. And so then you make all normal blood cells again, which is awesome, but do you think there might be some possible problems with whole body radiation and killing all your stem cells?
Yes.
Like what?
Killing the good stem cells.
Yeah, so for a while you have no immune system, or a very low functioning immune system, until that bone marrow gets working again. So it's, it's not in wide use yet. Otherwise, you can get blood transfusions, oxygen, pain medicine, things like that. Right. That's it. We finished on time. That's amazing. With everything. Go put this on your fridge. Then we're going to go get something to eat. I think I'll study about hemoglobin for a little bit.